before we dive into the code, I wanted to show you where I got it from and what I was following along with for my sample application. I didn't feel like, building an application myself. We have some great samples out there. This is a to-do that's been around for a long time. And there is a tutorial on docs.microsoft.com that you can use that has just a simple .NET Core application with a SQL backend. There are some prerequisites. So if you haven't installed Git, you haven't installed the .NET Core SDK, this will give you the links to do that, as well as you'll need to install the .NET tools for Entity Framework. I've done this with both Bash and PowerShell, so that command should work. So you can go here for the tutorial if you want to just follow along getting this set up. I think it's really helpful to do this as well. And then this is the code that is associated. So it'll have you clone this repository down. I actually forked this repository and I've made some changes, which I'll talk through. More than welcome to clone my repository as well. But I've just made a few changes for this demo that I'll walk through in a little bit. If you're working with my repository, if you've cloned it and you want to get going with my repository, there's probably a couple things you'll need to do in order to get it working. The first of which is to delete the Entity Framework migrations that I've added and get it working for you. If you're not familiar with Entity Framework, that's completely fine. Just know it's a way to interface with the database at the simplest way I can explain it. So I'm going to run a command here to delete this folder. And that will delete that folder. If we were to go here and look at the folder list, we'd no longer see a migrations folder, which is great. And then I'm going to add an initial creation of the migrations. What this is going to do is actually Entity Framework will create all of the tables for us when we deploy our database. So if we were to run this now locally on our machine, there's no database, there's no tables. So there's no way for us to interact with the website, to add to-dos, to delete to-dos. And we need to use Entity Framework to create those. It creates a migration script that will do that for us. And we'll need this when we move it into Azure. And so I'm going to do an initial creation of that. Add initial create, right? So that's using the .NET Core command .NET EF for Entity Framework migrations and add something called initial create. It's going to build our application and it's going to go through that process of adding that migration. And you should see here in this folder, notice that now there's a folder called migrations where we had none before. Okay. So now I want to actually run my application. So I'm just going to do a quick build and I'm going to do a run. Okay, application's up and running. You can access it on local port 5000. I had it up earlier. So we're going to refresh this here and we'll see that it's running. You notice that I'm going to kind of bring it off to this side here. Notice that when we refresh, you'll see a bunch of information pop through here. So, and I could go in and create a new to-do, say buy groceries, and I could set it for maybe tomorrow or next week. Maybe that's 2 weeks now, 2 weeks away. Click create. Awesome. I could go and look at the details of it. Back to list. I could edit it and say I can buy groceries. Instead, I could say buy power tools. Much better, and you'll see it's updated here, and then we could go ahead and delete it. Okay, so that's a simple application. Create, delete, not a big deal, and we've created a database, but this is sitting locally on our machine. This isn't sitting in Azure. This is all local to our machine. Okay, and actually I'm going to leave something in here so we can see the difference. We'll go back to buy groceries and we will add that back in and click create, and then we're going to end. All right, so now I'm going to flip back over to Visual Studio and walk through some of the simple changes I've made to for this specific instance of just demonstrating to you all the multi-tenancy. Okay, now we're going to focus on deploying this application into Azure and making sure that we run those migrations on our database in Azure so that we can have this application running fully. Okay, now what I'm going to focus on is taking this application and then deploying it to Azure. We need to run the migrations on the database in Azure so that our application will function properly. So let's flip over to Azure and make a few changes, and we'll then go into the deployment steps. So I want to quickly go through just some of the small changes I made to this application for the specific demo. The first of which is in the app settings file, I added a Azure region section with a region being local. And the reason for doing this is just so I'm going to create a health page, or I'll show you a health page where it shows me where is this page being served from. When it's running on my local machine, I want it to say local, but this value will get overridden by whatever I put in that app setting when I deploy it to the web app. And you're going to see that when we deploy it to various regions. Okay. So the first is that app setting. And I've created a page called health. If I run this here, let's go .NET run, and then we'll navigate back out to our website. And you'll see here, let me refresh that. You'll see we have a health page, /health, and it's showing the value coming out of that app setting. Okay. In order to serve that page up in, this is a MVC application, model, view, and controller. We need a model, we need a view, and we need a controller. So there's a controller here that serves that value. There's some code commented out that I can use to get the name of the database that we're connecting into as well. And then a model, there's a health status model, which we're passing to the page. And on that page, you'll see we're getting the configuration value from app settings. Here it says local, but when we deploy it to the East region, it'll say East US. When we run it in the West region, it'll say West US. And then also I have some code commented out here that we could show the server that we're connected to for the database. So those are just some small changes I made to this application so that it's really specifically for this demo, so we can see how the traffic is being routed as we leverage Traffic Manager to go from east to west. Jumping back here into the Azure portal, you'll see we now have some resources in the East as well as some resources in West US 2. We've created that web app and that app service plan in West US 2. Really identical configuration as East US, so I didn't walk you through that. We haven't created the database in West US as of yet, and the reason being is we're actually going to do that when we set up that geo-replication and that failover group listener. So I'll walk you through that in a little bit. But the first thing I wanted to do is add some application settings into our web app. So first, let's go into the East US app, and on the left-hand side, you'll see this setting for configurations. And in configurations, there are connection strings and application settings. We're actually going to add the connection string in a little bit, but first let's add the app setting that maps to that Azure region section that I had in my code. So here we're going to say Azure region, region, and we're going to say this is East US. Click OK and hit save. Once that's been updated, we are going to go over to West US and do the same. So it's been updated now. It's refreshing there. And we're going to go to West US 2 and the web app there. Go to configuration and click new setting. Azure region. Actually, it fills it out for me. West US 2 and click OK and save. Now, when we push our code up, you'll notice that it's going to use that value on that health page that we just talked about. Okay, now that we've done that, we want to also get our connection string from our database and add that connection string to the web apps so they know which database to talk to. When we looked at our code, you'll notice that in the app settings.json, it has a connection string here, and we named it my.db connection string, but it's connected to the local database, right? And that's fine. This is running locally. We don't want to put our connection string in here for our production database. We want to host it or store it on our app service. And what we might do is actually put this in Key Vault if we're really trying to be as secure as possible. But we'll put it in the web app in the connection string setting, and this will overwrite that value when it's deployed onto that platform. So we can go in here and into our server and go down to our connect. Actually, we're going to go back to our database, excuse me. And we'll say show database connection strings, and we'll grab this value here, and I'm going to take it off to another notepad. As you see, it doesn't fill out the password, so you need to put the password in to that value. So I'm going to do that off screen. and overwrite that there. And then we're going to go back in here to our web app in the East US. We're just going to do this in the East for now, just for testing purposes. And we are going to say new connection string. We're going to give it the name, which was my DB connection. And we're going to paste that value in there. And we're going to go SQL Server. And we're going to click OK and save. Now, if we take our code and we deploy it onto this web app, it's going to connect directly to the database sitting in East US. So we'll walk through that here next. Now, before I deploy out the application to Azure, I actually want to get the database updated in such a way that I can run the application, right? If I was to just deploy the application out there, it would look for that database, it would look for those tables, it wouldn't find it, and it would error out. And so I want to run my migrations on the database. There are lots of ways to achieve this, but I'm going to do it in the easiest way I know, which is to overwrite this connection string here with the connection string to my database, my remote database in Azure, and then run the migrations locally. Okay, this is definitely not the preferred way to do things, but I'm going to do it this way simply for speed. So what I'm going to do is go back over to the terminal here, and we're going to run that command to remove the existing migrations. So we're going to delete that migrations. I'll actually move this down here so you can see that enter that migrations folder disappeared. Okay, and then I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to copy in the connection string that I just placed into Azure, and I'm going to put it in here so that we can connect out to that database. Okay, and hit save. Then we're going to go back to the terminal, and we're going to go to do that same command, right? .NET EF migrations add initial create. Okay, so we're creating that migrations folder. See, it'll pop in there once that's done. There it is. And then we're going to have it run that migration against the database. So we're going to say .NET EF database update. Okay, so it's going to update the database. Now it's updating the database based on the connection string. So in this case, it's the remote database. All right, so that's run. How do we validate that? If we switch back over to the Azure portal, remember early on we saw that there was nothing there. It was an empty database with no tables. So we're going to go back into that database, go into the query editor. We'll put our password in again to connect out to that database. And once we're in here, we can open this and we should see some tables. Now these tables are empty. There's not going to be anything in there. So if I was to say select star from to do and run that query, it's empty. But now we have a database. We have the tables, we have whatever stored procedures or views may be associated with this. In this case, there's nothing, but we have it there, and we also have the migration history, so we can see what migrations have run. So now that we have our database up and running, and we have the tables there, we have our app settings and our connection string set in the web app, we can go ahead and deploy this web app into the East region and test the application, at least in a single region mode.